She steps onto the stage, lights blazing, Bible in hand, as thousands rise to their feet, cheering not just for a preacher, but for a woman who's become a brand. Joyce Meyer doesn't just preach sermons, she fills stadiums, commands an empire, and speaks to millions every single day. To her devoted followers, she's the ultimate survivor, a straight-talking, no-nonsense woman of God who overcame the darkest beginnings to live in the light. But what if we told you her story, the real story, is far more complicated than what you've heard from the pulpit? Before the jets, the jewelry, and the multi-million-dollar ministry, there was a little girl sitting in silence, hiding behind the walls of a Missouri home where pain was a daily routine. A girl who says she was sexually abused by her father for years, while her mother looked away. That same girl would one day become one of the wealthiest televangelists in the world. But success like this doesn't come without controversy. For every person who sees Joyce Meyer as a spiritual powerhouse, there's another who questions her empire's wealth, her message, and how a life built on trauma turned into a lifestyle of prosperity. Over the years, her name has become synonymous with healing and hope, and also with excess. So how did Joyce Meyer go from broken childhood to billionaire ministry? And what did she lose and gain on the way to the top? This is the real story of the woman who turned her pain into power, and why that power still divides people today. Before Joyce Meyer became a name synonymous with faith, healing, and prosperity, her childhood was anything but serene. Growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, Joyce's life behind closed doors was marked by trauma that would leave lasting scars. She has spoken candidly about enduring years of sexual abuse at the hands of her father, a man who should have been her protector, but instead became her tormentor. This abuse began when she was just a young girl and, heartbreakingly, continued for years. Even more painful was the fact that her mother, though aware, chose to remain silent, unwilling or unable to intervene. This chilling family dynamic created a perfect storm of betrayal and loneliness, with a child left to face unspeakable horrors alone. Joyce's memories of that time are raw and haunting. She recounts the fear and confusion that clouded her early years, the overwhelming shame that made her feel isolated from the world. The abuse wasn't a hidden secret, but a terrifying reality she was forced to endure daily. It robbed her of a childhood and left her grappling with deep emotional wounds that would follow her well into adulthood. Desperate for escape and a fresh start, Joyce married young. But instead of finding peace, her marriage brought new pain. Her husband was unfaithful and unreliable, and by the time she was just 23, she found herself a divorced single mother, burdened with not only the challenges of raising a child alone, but also the heavy weight of unhealed trauma. Financially strained and emotionally drained, Joyce was at a crossroads, unsure of where to turn or how to move forward. Yet even in the midst of this turmoil, a spark of resilience remained. Slowly, Joyce began turning toward faith, not as a sudden salvation, but as a gradual lifeline. It was a difficult, often painful process. She wrestled with anger, not only at her abuser, but at the idea of God itself. She questioned why she had to suffer and why the people who should have protected her had failed. But through those struggles, she found small moments of peace and understanding that laid the foundation for her future ministry. Joyce's healing journey was not a neat, linear path. It was messy, filled with setbacks and breakthroughs. She has shared how, in moments of solitude, she finally allowed herself to confront the full extent of her pain, a step that was both terrifying and liberating. It was in that raw honesty with herself that she found the strength to transform her story from one of victimhood to one of victory. This chapter of Joyce Meyer's life, marked by unspeakable pain and slow, painful healing, became the crucible from which her powerful message of hope and restoration was forged. But at this point in her journey, she was still very much a woman broken by her past, seeking a way to reclaim her future. After years marked by pain, confusion, and struggle, Joyce Meyer's life began to shift, not through a single miraculous moment, but through a series of small, profound awakenings that would set her on a path to becoming one of the most influential voices in modern Christianity. It wasn't an overnight change. It was a slow, sometimes difficult process of peeling back layers of hurt, anger, and doubt to find a purpose that could heal not only herself, but millions of others. In her early 20s, Joyce started attending church regularly. At first, it was simply a refuge, a place to escape the turmoil of her personal life and the memories that haunted her. But gradually, the words she heard, the scriptures she studied, and the sense of community began to resonate deeply. Faith wasn't just a comfort, it was a lifeline. She started reading the Bible with new eyes, seeing not just ancient stories, but a message of redemption that felt intensely personal. One turning point came when Joyce began sharing her story with others. At first, it was just small groups and informal gatherings, but her honesty, raw and unfiltered, struck a chord. People connected with her because she wasn't a polished preacher with a perfect life. She was a woman who had been broken and was still healing. Her vulnerability became her strength. Joyce's unique style, straightforward, passionate, and often laced with humor, set her apart. She didn't shy away from difficult topics, especially the kind of trauma she had endured. Instead, she used her experiences as a bridge to reach others who felt lost, broken, or ashamed. Slowly, her following grew. But with that growth came new challenges. As Joyce stepped into the spotlight, critics emerged, questioning her message and her methods. Some church leaders were skeptical of her unorthodox approach. Others questioned whether a woman with her background should hold such influence. Joyce faced these doubts head-on, refusing to let skepticism derail her mission. Her breakthrough wasn't just spiritual, it was entrepreneurial. Joyce began writing books, recording sermons, and building a ministry that reached beyond her local church. Her teachings about overcoming pain through faith resonated in a time when many felt disillusioned and searching for hope. She tapped into something deeply human, the universal struggle to find meaning in suffering. What truly set Joyce apart was her insistence on authenticity. She openly discussed her past abuses and personal failures, breaking the silence around issues that many preferred to ignore. This candidness made her relatable and helped dismantle stigma, especially around abuse and mental health within religious communities. By the time her ministry gained national attention, Joyce Meyer was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader, a teacher, and a symbol of resilience. Her story was no longer just about what happened to her, but about what she chose to do with it. Yet, as she climbed higher, questions lingered beneath the surface. How would she navigate the pressures of fame and fortune? Would her message of humility and healing survive the scrutiny that comes with public success? These questions set the stage for the next chapter in her journey, where faith, controversy, and power would collide. As Joyce Meyer's message spread, her influence grew exponentially, transforming her from a local preacher into a global phenomenon. With her books topping bestseller lists, television programs airing in millions of homes, and speaking engagements filling massive arenas, Joyce wasn't just delivering sermons, she was building an empire. This wasn't just a story of spiritual awakening, it was a story of remarkable success, wealth, and power that few televangelists achieve. But with that growth came complexity. Joyce Meyer Ministries evolved into a multi-million-dollar organization with extensive media reach, international outreach programs, and lucrative book deals. Her weekly television broadcast, Enjoying Everyday Life, became a staple for millions seeking inspiration and guidance. She built a brand synonymous with hope, healing, and practical Christian living. Joyce's rise to fame was fueled by a combination of her relatable story, charismatic delivery, and savvy business acumen. She wasn't just preaching, she was marketing a lifestyle, one that promised transformation and prosperity. This approach resonated with a wide audience, from those seeking comfort in faith to others drawn to the promise of abundance. Her wealth grew alongside her ministry. Joyce and her husband David invested in real estate, purchased lavish properties, including a sprawling estate in Missouri, and traveled the world in private jets. To many, she epitomized success and the rewards of faith-driven entrepreneurship. However, this rapid accumulation of wealth sparked controversy and scrutiny. Critics questioned the vast sums of money flowing through her ministry and the lavish lifestyle she led. Some accused her of preaching prosperity gospel, a theology suggesting that faith can lead to material wealth, while others argued that her riches contradicted the humble, service-focused message of Christianity. Joyce responded by emphasizing that her wealth enabled her to expand her ministry and help others. She has stated that financial blessings are a result of God's favor and that her mission remains focused on spreading the gospel and supporting charitable causes worldwide. But skeptics remain unconvinced, fueling debates about the ethical boundaries of televangelism. Behind the scenes, managing such a vast organization required navigating the challenges of balancing ministry goals with business realities. Joyce Meyer Ministries became a model of how faith and commerce intersect in modern religious movements, a phenomenon both celebrated and criticized. Her rise also coincided with increased media attention and public scrutiny. Every statement, donation, and purchase was analyzed by supporters and detractors alike, turning Joyce into a lightning rod for discussions about religion, money, and influence in America. Despite the controversies, Joyce Meyer's impact is undeniable. She helped reshape the landscape of Christian media, bringing faith into millions of living rooms and inspiring countless people to confront their own struggles. Her story, one of survival, faith, and success, continues to captivate and divide. As she reached the peak of fame and fortune, questions remained. How would Joyce reconcile her past with her present? Could she maintain authenticity in the glare of public attention? And what price, if any, would she pay for the empire she built? No rise to fame is without its shadows, and Joyce Meyer's journey has been marked by a fair share of controversy and criticism that have tested both her ministry and her personal brand. As her influence expanded, so did the scrutiny, with detractors and watchdogs closely examining every facet of her empire, from finances to theology to personal conduct. One of the most persistent criticisms revolves around the vast wealth Joyce Meyer and her ministry have amassed. While Meyer preaches messages of hope and healing, critics argue that her lavish lifestyle, including multi-million-dollar homes, private jets, and luxury vehicles, is at odds with the Christian ideals of humility and modest living. This tension is a flashpoint in the broader debate over what's known as the prosperity gospel, the idea that faith can directly lead to material wealth. Opponents claim this teaching exploits vulnerable followers, promising riches in exchange for donations, and that it distorts the core message of Christianity. Financial transparency has also been a major point of contention. Investigations and reports have questioned how much of the donations to Joyce Meyer Ministries actually reach charitable causes versus how much funds administrative costs and personal expenses. Some watchdog organizations have raised concerns about the lack of detailed financial disclosures, prompting debates about accountability in faith-based organizations. But criticism hasn't been limited to money. Joyce's theology and style have also drawn fire. Some traditional religious leaders have accused her of watering down scripture to appeal to a mass audience, suggesting her teachings prioritize comfort and material success over spiritual rigor and sacrifice. Others see her candidness about personal struggles, once revolutionary, as overly commercialized, turning trauma into a marketing tool. Then there are the more personal allegations and public controversies. Joyce Meyer's past and the ministry's handling of abuse disclosures have been questioned, with some critics pushing for greater transparency about how the organization supports victims of abuse within its community. Others scrutinize her husband, David Meyer's role as the ministry's president, raising questions about nepotism and governance. Despite the storms of criticism, Joyce has remained steadfast. She addresses skeptics with a blend of scripture, personal testimony, and an unwavering belief in her mission. In interviews and public appearances, she insists that her wealth is a blessing meant to be used for ministry growth and charitable outreach, not personal extravagance. Her defenders argue that she has revolutionized faith-based media and brought healing to millions, challenging old paradigms about women in ministry and the power of vulnerability. This complex web of acclaim and criticism paints a picture of a figure who is as polarizing as she is influential. Joyce Meyer embodies the contradictions of modern televangelism between faith and commerce, healing and controversy, celebrity and sincerity. As her story continues to unfold, one question remains at the heart of her legacy. Can Joyce Meyer maintain her authenticity and mission in a world that demands both spiritual purity and business acumen? And what will the future hold for a woman who has already overcome so much, yet still faces relentless scrutiny? But for all the headlines, the mansions, and the private jet chatter, it's what Joyce Meyer didn't do that truly reshaped her legacy. At the height of the backlash over her ministry's wealth, when watchdogs were circling and senators were asking tough questions, Joyce didn't hide. She didn't shrink. She stood in front of her congregation, bright stage lights glaring down, and said flatly, "I may not be perfect, but I'm not fake." And for millions of her followers, that was enough. Still, something shifted. Gone were the flashy designer labels that once screamed across her stage wardrobe, less Chanel, more subtle neutrals. Her messaging, once full of bravado and holy certainty, began to soften. "I'm still learning," she confessed in a podcast years later. "I used to think faith meant pretending everything was fine. Now I know real faith is staying when it's not." Those close to Meyer say the transformation wasn't a PR stunt. It was personal. Insiders from her ministry recall how, after her mother passed away, Joyce started revisiting old family trauma, even entering counseling herself. "She always talked about healing," said one former staffer, "but that was the first time I saw her actually go through it." And the changes spilled outward. Her sermons became less about triumph and more about truth. She began spotlighting mental health, self-doubt, and the kind of spiritual exhaustion that her earlier teachings might have once dismissed as lack of faith. Critics who'd accused her of hawking a prosperity gospel began to take notice, not because she apologized, but because she evolved. She didn't delete the past. She added to it. Her audience evolved too. No longer just packed with beaming suburban moms and Sunday regulars, her events started attracting women in recovery, people deconstructing their faith, even skeptics looking for something more honest than holy. For them, Joyce wasn't just a preacher anymore. She was proof that people could change without losing their platform. And in the rare moments when she addresses the controversies now, she does it with something her critics never expected: disarming candor. "I made mistakes," she told a crowd in Dallas, "but I didn't make excuses." That line alone went viral. And yet, for all the healing, all the softening, and all the evolution, one question still lingers, one that her critics whisper, her fans wrestle with, and Joyce Meyer herself seems to dance around, never fully answering. Can a woman of God be rich, famous, and still be right with God? It's a question that has haunted her for decades, and one that still fuels debate in the quiet corners of social media and late-night talk shows. Some call her a hustler in high heels, a televangelist who packaged trauma and sold it back to the brokenhearted for profit. Others see her as a survivor who refused to stay small, who turned pain into purpose and made no apologies for thriving while doing it. In a world where spiritual leaders are expected to be either martyrs or moguls, Joyce Meyer dares to be both. She once said, "God doesn't need you poor to prove you're holy." For her fans, that wasn't just a soundbite, it was liberation. For her critics, it was confirmation. But the woman at the center of it all? She's not asking for your agreement. She's already moved on. These days, Joyce splits her time between ministry work and writing, still filling auditoriums and topping bestseller lists, though now, her tone is gentler, her stories more confessional. "I'm not who I was 20 years ago," she recently told an interviewer. "Thank God. But I also wouldn't be who I am now without that version of me." And maybe that's the real takeaway. Not a clean redemption arc or a fall from grace scandal, but something messier, more human. A woman who made millions preaching about God, stumbled under the weight of her own success, and kept preaching anyway, this time with fewer answers and more honesty. In the end, Joyce Meyer's story isn't just about faith or fame. It's about the tightrope between the two and what it costs to walk it under the world's microscope. So, is she a spiritual icon or a savvy brand? The truth, as always, lives somewhere in between. And like most things with Joyce Meyer, it depends on who you ask and what you're willing to believe.